Alright, in this video, I want to talk about lunar or moon Sabbaths and help you understand what these are and to show you that there is actually a good possibility that this is how you are to figure out the correct Sabbath. Now, I used to be a Seventh-day Adventist, and if you know anything about the Seventh-day Adventist, it is surrounded or centered around the fourth commandment about the Sabbath, how God rested 6 days and on the seventh day he rested. And to truly show that you honor and worship him, you cease from your work on the Sabbath. And this is a seal to show that you are his, according to Seventh-day Adventists. But inside the church, we would have this debate of whether or not the Sabbath is on Saturdays, or is it decided by the moon? And in these discussions or debates, a very good point would be made, and it had to do with an island. Because let's say you were out in an airplane, out on a cruise, and you crash landed. The ship sunk, and you washed up on shore. You don't know what day it is, right? Or let's say this happens to you, and you're an atheist or an agnostic or an unbeliever, right? That you don't pay attention to the Sabbath, you don't care about the Sabbath, right? But while you washed up on shore, all you have that washed up with you is the Bible. So you end up reading the Bible, and you end up starting to pray, and you start believing. And you want to keep the Sabbath day, right? How would you figure out what day's the Sabbath? Would you just start, well, today I work and I'll count 6 days, and every seventh day I'll count as the Sabbath? And be like, you could do that, but that could land on any day, right? That could land on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. You wouldn't know because you don't know what day it is, right? So how would you be able to know? And we would say, well, in Genesis, we're told that we can use the sun, moon, and stars to tell the times, right? And in Psalm 104:19, it talks about using the moon to tell the seasons as well, which I think is very key because Paul says that we are not ignorant of the seasons, right? Of when the rapture would be. That's the context of what he's talking about there. And the moon is also connected with the Sabbath, as the new moon is a Sabbath day, right? So it's intertwined with it. Not to mention, as you can see here in these pictures I duplicated, Ezekiel 46, 1 through 3 connects the new moon and the Sabbath day, saying that the gates will be open on every new moon and Sabbath. And everybody will come to worship every new moon and Sabbath, making this clear connection between the two, right? And nowhere in the scriptures does it tell you what day of the month the weekly Sabbath actually lands on, right? But if you're out on that island, if you found out the new moon, like you saw the slither here, let's actually change the color so we get a contrast. Let's, I think blue will stand out here. So let's say you see the first slither. Well, you know, you got the first day there. You got the Sabbath, right? So you saw that at the night, you know the following day you rest, right? And then 6 days you work, right? So let's say this is Saturday, right? So you got your Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Oh, I forgot Sunday. My bad. So it's Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday, right? And then Sabbath again. So you got your 6 days, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And what you notice here is that the Sabbath will always land on the 1st, the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and 29th of every month. That's very key, right? And this actually helps you understand how the feast days will end up playing out, right? Because there's nothing in the scriptures that ever warn you about what you ought to do if the Passover, for example, lands on a weekly Sabbath. What do? Because the Passover isn't just about the priests offering up sacrifice. You have to sacrifice your own lamb. So you have to do a work. And not only that, that Passover is also a preparation day where you prepare for the following day's Sabbath. Because not only is it a weekly Sabbath, right, the 15th day, it is also the first day of unleavened bread, which is, again, another Sabbath, right? So in order for you to actually make sure you keep that and honor the Sabbath day, but also keep the Passover can never actually land on a weekly Sabbath. And if you actually look at the history of things, the Passover never lands on a weekly Sabbath. And there's no warning about what to do when this happens because it's not going to happen if you calculate the Sabbath using the moon. Which explains why God never warned about it, right? So if you're out on that island, you don't know what day it is, you see that first slither of the new moon, well, now you know, oh, there's the Sabbath. So if a Seventh-day Adventist, we would be like, oh yeah, see, that makes sense. You could keep the Sabbath and still honor God and worship God, even on that desert island where you don't know what day it is. But you see, here comes the issue. And we're going to use this calendar here. Now, a lunar month is not going to be 30 days. It might be 29 and a half days or something like that. It might end up being closer to 28 days because of the moon cycle is not precise lining up with 30 days. But we're going to go with this, right? We're going to go with this because this could be something that happens. 29 and a half days, you might end up, that half a day ends up being 30 days, right? So we got this 30-day month here. And that would mean that right here on Monday, right, because this would be a Sunday, this would be a Monday, there's no day here, but that would be the next day over here. This is Monday, right, the first day of the second month, right? This is going to be the first month. This is the second month. So this day over here ends up being that day, which makes it a Sabbath because it's the new moon, right? And then every Monday that month on the Gregorian calendar here is a Sabbath because it would be on the 1st, the 8th, the 15th, the 22nd, and the 29th. Those are always Sabbath day. So if this first month is the Passover month, right? Well, the second month where you have second Passover, that would also land on the 14th, right before the weekly Sabbath. And it still wouldn't mess up. You wouldn't have to worry about it landing on a weekly Sabbath because when you use the moon, that will never be an issue. And in the scriptures, the only time we actually get a day of the month when the Sabbath actually is in Exodus chapter 16. And we'll briefly cover that. You can read the whole chapter if you feel the need, but we'll explain it here. So in this first verse here of Exodus 16, it says, "And they took their journey from Elim." This is talking about Israel after they left Egypt, right? This is the Exodus. "And all the congregation of the children of Israel came onto the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departing out of the land of Egypt." So you see here, it's the 15th day of the second month, right? So if we're using this thing that I got here, that would be this day right here, right? Right next to second Passover here, right? And at verse 2 it says, "And the whole congregation of the children of Israel murmured against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness." And this is where they're talking about they want food, right? So Moses goes and he talks to God. And you, of course, keep on reading if you so choose, but let's go to the point that we want to make here. Verse 7 it says, because Moses is saying that God heard you, don't worry about it, right? And this is on the 15th day of the second month. He's saying this, right? Because he tells him, I think I skipped a big part here that I should probably go look at. I'm sorry about that, messing this up here. Well, in between where I read in verse 7, he talks about how 6 days you will gather, and on that 6th day you'll gather even more, because on the 7th day you're going to rest, right? So he's telling them this on the 15th day. So at verse 7 he says, "And in the morning," which would be the next day on the 16th day, right here, the first day of the week, right? He says, "And in the morning then ye shall see the glory of the Lord, for that he heareth your murmurings against the Lord, and what are we that we murmur against him?" And then he goes on at verse 8 to say, "And Moses said, This shall be when the Lord shall give you in the evening flesh to eat, and in the morning bread to the full." Right? And then if we want to come down to verse, of course you can read the whole thing. It says here, verse 21, "And they gathered it every morning," talking about the manna, "and every man according to his eating, and the sun waxed hot, it melted. And it came to pass that on the 6th day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers for one man, and all the rulers of the congregation came and told Moses. And he said unto them, This is that which the Lord hath said, Tomorrow is the rest of the holy Sabbath unto the Lord. Bake that which ye will bake today, and see that ye will seethe, and that which remaineth over lay up for you to be kept until the morning." So you see there how let's change the color so you can see what I'm saying here. So on the 15th day of the second month, right here, he tells them, in the morning, you're going to gather bread. In the evening, you're going to gather flesh, right? So that would be on the 16th day. And then on the 6th day, they gathered twice as much. And then they kept the Sabbath on that 22nd day of that month. So in Exodus chapter 16, the only record of what day the Sabbath lands on happens to line up with what we see for our lunar Sabbath. And there is slight connection to this happening 3 months in a row. Slight connection. As you can go back to Exodus chapter 12, and you can read about how they offered up the Passover here on the 14th day, and how they left Egypt on here the 15th day. Right? And then going to Exodus 19, you'll read about the 15th day of the third month, where that's where they have set up tents, which appears as though they're resting and keeping the Sabbath on the 15th day of the third month, right? It's not quite saying that's what they're doing, but that's what we read. So it appears as though 3 months in a row, the Sabbath is on this cycle here. And that can only happen even 2 months in a row. It's very highly unlikely that it will happen 2 months in a row on the Gregorian calendar, that the Sabbath would land on the 1st, 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th of the month. 2 months in a row, that's not going to happen, but it might happen very rarely, right? That's more likely that it's because it's a lunar Sabbath if it happens to land on those days 2 months in a row. But to do 3 months in a row, it's never going to happen on a Gregorian style calendar, where Saturday is always on the 1st, 8th, 15th, 22nd, and 29th. 3 months in a row, not going to happen, right? But on a lunar calendar, that's going to happen 3 months in a row. It's going to happen 12 months in a row. It's going to happen every month in a row, right? So I just wanted to make this video to show you that even using the scriptures, this seems to line up. And that's why we never have an issue of a feast day landing on a weekly Sabbath, especially a feast day like Passover, where you actually have to do work, not just the priests, but everybody, right? You have to work that day. So in a day that requires you to do work, how can you also keep the weekly Sabbath if they land on the same day? Because if you end up doing the work and keeping the Passover on the weekly Sabbath, you're breaking God's law. You're breaking the Sabbath. Right? So you see how there's a conflict there. You're breaking the law, the Sabbath day. You're sinning. But then if you keep the weekly Sabbath and you don't keep the Passover, you're also not keeping the law. You're breaking the Passover. Right? So you see how there's a conflict if you don't use the lunar month, the lunar Sabbath here. If you don't use the lunar Sabbath, well, Passover could easily land on a Saturday, and then what do you do? What do you do? Because the Bible doesn't tell you what to do, because that's never going to be a problem if you're doing it this way. And that would be my foundational argument to support a lunar or moon Sabbath, to determine when the Sabbath is. Right? And some people are against this. They're really stuck with their tradition, but they don't really have a reason to fight against this. The only thing that could really come up as an issue, let's see if I can shrink this. Let's shrink this all down. That's cool that I can actually do that. I didn't know my writing was going to shrink down with the picture, but that's cool. We can move that over the side. The issue would end up being, let's see if I can bring in the photo again here. I want to, why can't I, there we go. Let's bring in a bigger one here. The only issue that would come up here is calculating something like the Shavuot. So we're going to use this here to do Shavuot. Let's duplicate it one more time. And line that up here. There we go. Line it up like that. There we go. There we go. That works out pretty good. Let's get it as big as we can to stay on the screen. There we go. All right. So how would we figure, if we use the lunar calendar here and calculate the Sabbaths using the moon, how would we find out Shavuot? All right, so this is going to be the first month of the year, Nisan, or Abib, Aviv, and we're going to have the second month, and we're going to have the third month, right? And this should be enough to figure out when it would be, right? So you're going to count 7 complete Sabbaths. So there's 2 ways to do this. You count the new moon as a Sabbath, or you don't count the new moon as a Sabbath. And we're going to just act like the months are 30 days, right? Just to make it easy. I don't want to cause too much confusion with you. I know some of this might be a bit much for you to chew on and digest. So let's try to keep it simple here and just use the calendars, the months we got up here. All right, so I'm going to shrink down the pen so it's not so thick. And then let's use green. I think that will show up pretty well. So Passover right here, that actually doesn't show up as well as I want. Let's try the blue. All right, that shows it pretty well. Passover, the 14th day of the first month. Then you would have the first day of unleavened bread. And nope, not the first day of the week here. You wouldn't have your necessarily the raising from the dead here. Because unleavened bread, unleavened bread. First fruits is a feast that isn't consistent on where it actually lines up, right? But the Bible does say it's on the first day of, right? And we know that's not the first day of the month because the Passover is on the 14th day of the month. So it would have to be here on the first day of the week. So we're going to put first fruits here, right? Now, this here, an issue that obviously you should be seeing here is where is the 3 days and 3 nights? That doesn't fit, right? Doesn't fit. And I would agree. That's something that definitely needs to be addressed. I'm not going to lie, right? This is a hole in the argument. No doubt about it, right? I'm not going to defend it and ignore it. I'm going to admit that's an issue. It doesn't quite line up with the lunar Sabbath here, right? Not at all, right? But also keep in mind that this is not talking about Friday, Saturday, Sunday. For all we know, this happened on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, right? Because this is a lunar calendar. So just because the end of the week is lined up here on the calendar here, this line here is the Sabbath. That doesn't mean that's a Saturday. All right? Keep that in mind as well. Which means that Passover doesn't mean it landed on a Friday here. But we're going to use this lunar calendar here. And now we're going to do Shavuot. So, after first fruits, we wouldn't end up really counting this week because you would think you would have to go 7 complete Sabbaths. So you would have this year 6 days. So we could count this as 1, but we're going to have it there as a possible, the first Sabbath, right? So then here would be either the first or second Sabbath. And then right here would be where the new moon is, but that would be right over here now. Right? This is the first day of the next month, which would mean this is the possible second or third Sabbath to count. Right? But we might not count that. So the next actual Sabbath from here would be obviously over here, which would mean this might be the possible second, third, or fourth Sabbath. I'm hoping I'm not confusing you here. But if you count the new moon, this is the fourth Sabbath. If you don't count the new moon, it's the third Sabbath. If you don't count the first Sabbath after first fruits, then that is the second Sabbath. So you following along here? So then that would mean the next one here is the possible third, fourth, or fifth, which would mean this is the possible fourth, fifth, or sixth, which would mean this is the possible fifth, fourth, sixth, sorry about that, going backwards here, or seventh, right? So if this is the seventh, well then this day right here would be Shavuot. It's the first day of the week, but doesn't mean it's a Sunday, right? Because if this was Sunday, that would mean this is Monday, which would make this actually a Tuesday. So Shavuot would have landed on a Tuesday. But if we don't count the new moons, so we keep on going, then this new moon here, we're going to skip over because we're not counting new moons, right? So we would go to the next full Sabbath, and that would mean that this is the possible 6th or 7th Sabbath, depending if you count this one or not, right? Which would mean this would be your last possible 7 if you don't count this one over here. So you see how we come up to 3 different days, because that would mean this is a possible Shavuot or this is a possible Shavuot. Right? You following? I hope so. So, and since this would be a Tuesday right here, this would mean that this is a Wednesday, which would mean that right here, the following day is a Thursday. We'll put an H there so you know it's not Tuesday. So, the first Shavuot, I'll change the colors. Right here is on a Tuesday, 7 Sabbaths after first fruits, right? And potentially you could even count this one here, right? And not count the first one, which would make this day a Sabbath. I mean the Shavuot, right? You counted 7 Sabbaths, but you don't count the first one, but you count the new moons. Well, then that would be a Sabbath. But if you don't count the new moons and you count the first one there, well, then you have this one. And every month, Shavuot would be on a Thursday, right? Just depending on whether or not you counted this first one and if you counted the new moons or not. So you see how right here, when you're calculating Shavuot, you can come up to 4 different dates depending on how you count the Sabbaths. This is where it's probably confusing, and I lost a lot of you. Because then you have to put this to a Gregorian calendar. But there's also another issue here. And that is counting the days, right? Because a lot of people seem to think that Shavuot is 50 days later, right after first fruits. You count 7 Sabbaths, complete Sabbaths, and then boom, there you go, right? So, if we were to do that, and we're gonna skip this first Sabbath here, and we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that's a Sabbath right there. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That would be the Sabbath there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's a Sabbath there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's a Sabbath. So we got 4 Sabbaths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's 5 Sabbaths. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that's how many Sabbaths? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So one more. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And there's your final Sabbath, which would mean X marks the spot here. That's your Shavuot. And that gives you 5 different days to when Shavuot would be. And this would be the 50th day after that first Sabbath, right? But then you would just basically rewind a week if you counted this first Sabbath that we didn't count. Then you have this day over here, and X marks the spot here. So you see how there's 6 different days I'm getting to figure out when Shavuot is. And then we would have to put this onto a Gregorian calendar, which would still be 6 different dates, but they would all be different days depending on how you calculated it. So this is why I was saying someone like, what's his name? Aaron from God a Minute, when he was like so certain about where Shavuot is, I was like, I don't think you should be that certain. There's many ways to come to where Shavuot is, and you may be wrong here, right? But yeah, his last video kind of inspired me to do this because he was against the lunar Sabbath, and I was kind of thinking, well, the only thing that would be against the lunar Sabbath is this right here, the 3 days and 3 nights, because Passover would always be right here on the 6th day of the week, right before the weekly Sabbath to start unleavened bread. And then first fruits, it says, was on the first day of the week. And we all know that that is not 3 days and 3 nights. Right? So that doesn't fit. So that really kind of flattens this whole thing out. It takes the wind out of the sails. It shows that there's a hole in the boat, that this is going to sink. Because if you look at the 3 days and 3 nights, let's, I wonder if I can duplicate this. No, I can't. Let me try to bring up another one here. All right. So to do 3 days and 3 nights, we know right here on Sunday, let's say this is Sunday over here, the 16th day of this month here. Right around sunrise on that day, Jesus, there was an earthquake, he rose from the dead, right? So, if we rewind and we have Saturday night and Saturday, I don't know why I put an S there. We got Saturday night and day, and then we have Friday night and day, and then we have Thursday night and day. Well, then right here was the crucifixion on a Wednesday. And I'm just saying Wednesday because that's the middle of the week for us. I'm not saying that he was crucified on what we call a Wednesday. Right? Because then he's crucified here on Wednesday, and at evening, he's not even into the tomb yet. Right? I don't count this night here because they didn't get him into the tomb until like the middle of the night. Because at evening is when he's finally dead, and then they go to Pilate to ask for his body, which doesn't take 2 seconds to get an audience with Pilate. Then Pilate sends soldiers to go see if he's dead. They stick a spear in him. He's dead. Then they get permission to go take him, and then they prepare his body to put into the tomb. This all did not take them 5 minutes, right? This took some time. So this first night here, he doesn't count, right? So he's in the tomb Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, and then an earthquake around dawn on Sunday, showing you the day starts during the day when the actual sun comes out, not at evening. And this is where he's risen to start this day, the first day of the week. This lines up, right? This lines up. But you see, the issue comes in here is that it doesn't quite fit with a Sunday resurrection, right? Because people want to say that right here, the day after, was the weekly Sabbath, right? They want to say that this day here was a weekly Sabbath. It's the Sabbath of unleavened bread, right? And that would mean there was this Sabbath, and then there was the weekly Sabbath, then the resurrection, right? This is not the weekly Sabbath. This would be the first day of unleavened bread Sabbath, and then the weekly Sabbath over here. So you'd have two Sabbaths, which does line up a little bit with scriptures. In Matthew 28, in the Greek it says after the Sabbaths. It doesn't say Sabbath, even though in the English it's singular. It's Sabbaths. And it could be because they were on the same exact day, according to the lunar calendar. Right? Don't know. But even in the scriptures it says, oh, they put him in the tomb, and then after the Sabbath, which would be this day here, let's use a different color. After the Sabbath, so the Sabbath they're talking about is the unleavened bread Sabbath, the first day of unleavened bread. Put a 1 here. Then on this day, they came and did some things for Jesus and what have you. Or they prepared stuff. They didn't come to him. They said they prepared some things. Right? They put him in the tomb before this day, in the evening of this day, on Wednesday night. This day they rested according to the Sabbath. Then over here they prepared. Then they rested again here on this Sabbath. Because it said they prepared some certain things for him, like spices and what have you, that they didn't get a chance, I guess, to bury him with. And then they came here, and he was already risen. So the only issue is getting people to understand that, not that it's really a big issue, is that there's actually two Sabbaths between when Jesus was crucified and when he rose from the dead. One is a feast Sabbath of unleavened bread, and the other is a weekly Sabbath, which the scriptures backs up. So this looks very much correct, but it doesn't line up with a lunar Sabbath, right? So all the stuff where I was showing you how a lunar Sabbath looks very viable, it doesn't quite line up with this, right? There's a lot that supports it, but then all of a sudden when you look at the crucifixion, the only way it fits is if you believe basically a Catholic view where, let's see if I can move this over here, where Jesus was crucified on a Friday, in the tomb on Saturday, and by Sunday he rose. But that's only one day and one night over here. And I have to change the color for that to show up. Right? Because he would have gone in for Saturday and Saturday night, because he didn't really get into the tomb until sometime in the middle of the night, Friday night, if he was crucified right here, which means he was in the tomb for 1 day and 1 night, and then he rose again on Sunday. That's only 1 day and 1 night. That doesn't fit. So that is where the actual lunar calendar gets shot down, is looking at the crucifixion. But I wanted to talk about it just to show you and waste your time, I guess, to educate you about it, because it does make a lot of sense, except it doesn't fit the crucifixion. It doesn't. So then it leads you to be like, well, then the Sabbaths would be counted the only other way possible, right? A Sabbath is every Saturday, because that's the only real other way to calculate it. But here's another issue. Is that so? Because if the Sabbath is every Saturday, well, what happens when Passover lands on a Saturday? So you see how both these views don't quite fit, right? So it's hard to figure out which one is which, right? Which one is which? It's kind of hard to really grasp and understand, right? Which one's which? Like, how is this? Right? Because they both have some validity that really grab a hold of you and be like, here we go. But like I said over here, where's the 3 days and 3 nights with the lunar Sabbath? And then over here, it's like, but what if Passover lands on a Saturday? You got yourself an issue. Right? Something definitely to pray about, something to think about. I'm not going to give you an answer because I'm not quite sure, to be honest. I don't know if there is a certain thing that happens if Passover lands on a weekly Sabbath. Like that justifies you breaking the weekly Sabbath. There's nothing in scriptures to back that up. And I don't know if there's something different about the 3 days and 3 nights that we don't really realize. When he says, I'll be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights, when he says days and nights, it makes it seem like it's literally how we would look at 3 days and 3 nights, right? I don't see how we can take it any other way. And in the heart of the earth, the only way I can take that is him being actually dead and his soul went into the heart of the earth, right? Into Sheol, Hades, hell, right? He went there. And he only went there when he was absent from the body, right? Imagine we're all on the same page with that. So I don't know if we would imagine and speculate, well, time's different when you're dead. So he was out of the body. You know, some people say that, oh, I was an out-of-body experience and it felt like weeks, months, years, but it was only 5 minutes that I was out of my body, right? And it's like, that's not evidence, right? Like I said, it's speculation, it's imagining. But there might be something to that. It's kind of hard to fit it all together here. So that's why I was saying to someone like Aaron, not that he's wrong, but that he should be open to looking at other days this year. And people are going to take that again, probably as an attack. Whatever. I'm not attacking him. I'm just saying, hey, your calculation to where Shavuot is past. How about we look at some other days? This right here is not another day to look at, right? Because like I said, I'm already looking at new wine. And whether you think new wine is Passover or not, there's still a lot of stuff with new wine that you should look at, in my opinion. And if you don't want to look at new wine, you don't want to look at new oil, what about the Feast of Trumpets? Are you just dismissing that as, oh, that's when Jesus returns? And if that's like, oh, okay, we're going to wait till next year to look again, and we're just going to skip over any other possible time, I don't think that's what we ought to do. But to each their own, right? I mean, if you want to stop looking for this year, okay, but I'm open to being wrong. Like I'm showing you here, both these views make sense, but there's something that just doesn't quite fit. I don't know. There's missing information that I'm missing. Maybe you have, and you can share it with me. But there's just something off, right? So I probably didn't answer any questions. I didn't satisfy anything here, but I'm showing you in as much detail, going over it as much as I can to show you that it's tough to figure these things out, because every time, it's like you're building a boat. Each time you're building this argument, you're building a boat, right? And you think you got the boat fixed and it's finished and it's ready to go, and then you go out in the water and there's a leak, and you're like, where is this leak? And then you're like, I just can't figure it out. Every time I try to use the lunar Sabbath, there's a leak. And then it's like you try to remove the lunar Sabbath, and then you go out and you have the boat, and there's a leak in that one. And you're like, well, I don't know any other way to make a boat. How am I supposed to go out here in a boat and go fishing or get to the other side without a boat? But every time, the only two ways I know how to make a boat leak. Right? What are you going to do? I'm trying to eat some humble pie here to be like, I'm not choosing a side because I don't know which one to go with, because I'm hesitant to get in a leaky boat. All right? So there's got to be something that's in between, or some third option that we're not aware of. Right? There's something I'm missing. There's something I'm misapplying. And maybe you saw it while you were listening, if you were able to pay attention. I know I'm not the most entertaining guy. But anyway, I want to stop rambling here. But thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. I think I had a lot of different stuff on here. Shrink it all down. And yeah, that is that. If you enjoyed the video, please take a moment to pray to our Heavenly Father that He keeps us going and shows us how to figure this out, how to know when He's coming for us. All right? Is it on an appointed time, on some kind of feast? Is it any time? Is it imminent? Let us know. Because every time I put together something, I find a hole in it. And let me change that. I find a hole in anything I put together. All right? So I can't tell you to believe it and to trust in it, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to give you these ideas, and maybe you can see where I went wrong and hopefully help me. And then when somebody else brings an argument of what they believe is a good thing, I can just sit there and I see a hole in it. Right? And then everybody gets mad at you for pointing out the hole. Like, well, should I just let you jump in the boat when there's a hole in it? And then somebody else comes up with something, and it's like, well, there's a hole in that one too. Right? Kind of like these people using speculation and imagination 45 times 45 is 2025. Okay, but why are you doing that multiplication? Or the Satan's little season's 21 years, 22 years. What do you have to back that up other than that's what you want it to be, right? You see, there's holes. They're like holes everywhere. And it's like, I don't know how to fix the holes, so it's like, what do we just tear down the boat and build a new one? And that's why I said focus on the year. The year looks like we're in that year. But to figure out anything other than that, it's hard to find anything that really actually truly fits where there's no reason to doubt it. And I don't want to get your hopes up for nothing. But you can also have hope in this. I'm not infallible. I don't know everything. So maybe I'm wrong and there's not really a hole. I'm imagining this somehow. I'm misconstruing something here. And we got a lot of hope for. An example would be like the Feast of New Wine. That looks like a very good time for the rapture. Right? Jesus said he wouldn't drink the wine again until he drinks it anew with us in his kingdom. He said he's going to prepare a place for us and that you can't put new wine in old wine bottles, right? Which would be our bodies, a new spirit and a new body, right? You see some connections to that. And Shavuot was in 3 parts. Whether they were 50 days apart each doesn't quite fit, right? But it's pretty close, right? Shavuot had the grain, it had the wine, and it had the oil. But the grain was ready before everything, and then a few months later you have the wine and the other fruits, the summer fruits, and then you have after that the oil, right? So you get like 3 different harvests. But yeah, I know I can just kind of keep going on this, so I'm going to stop here and just thank you for watching, and thank you for your prayers. Just amen in Jesus' name that he helps us out here. Should be good to go here. But if you want to help out some more, please like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, share the video, share the channel, interact in the comments section. These things help out a lot. And if you are a cheerful giver, there's 4 ways you can support in the info description box if you so choose. That would be fantastic. But I don't know how many people actually made it through this video. This one, I'm not going to lie, is a bit drawn out and dull. It's just straight information, and then there's really information to just let you know that it's faulty, right? And so it kind of leaves you in like a cliffhanger. And I guess this is like a cliffhanger episode, but sorry about it. That it is what it is. So, thanks for watching and take care.